G'day mate and welcome to Shipbuilding Fundamentals with me, Jetty. In this series we've been breaking down ships with one topic per video. We've covered engines, collectors, crushers, storage, weapons and more. Today we're going to be doing a deep dive into power. Not only making power but also saving power. So today I invite you to sit back and learn with me because I thought this would be a quick 5-minute video until I started digging and realized that the Factorio rabbit hole goes so much deeper. I also asked before we get into the complicated stuff, can I borrow a like? If you didn't learn anything along the way, you didn't find the video helpful, then by all means, you can have your like back. So obviously it goes without saying we should definitely talk about solar first, because this is going to be your first choice when it comes to power up in space, and pretty much going to be a staple throughout the whole of your Factorio space journey. Of course, solar panels don't make a whole lot of power on Narvis, but up here in space, they are that much more efficient. If we check the space map, we can see that at Narvis, you have 300% of normal solar power in space. If we were to go visit vulcanus, we'd all be all the way up at 600%. Gleba is at 200%, Forgola is 120%, and of course Aquilo is at 60%. If we go out to the solar system edge and a whole lot further, you are down to 1% power. So it's something you definitely need to take into consideration. In saying that, I do admit that I have an Aquilo runner ship, that it has rocket launchers, foundries, and all the whistles and bells, and is running on nothing but solar power. Of course, with everything Factorio space age, you should definitely consider quality when it comes to your solar panels. As you can see, this having the 300% bonus, being the 100% that they have normally, plus an extra 200%. On top of that, I have basic solar panels outputting 180 kilowatts. If I go up to uncommon, we're now up to 230, rares are 288, epics are 342, and of course legendaries are 450, and this is all in Narvis orbit. If you go over to accumulators, this is where power becomes even more important, and I really recommend that everybody should have at least some accumulators splattered around their spaceships to cover the spikes in power demand of the orbital factory. If we look at our very first basic accumulator, we can see that it holds 5 megajoules worth of power. It also has a max input and max output rate, so you can only charge and discharge these accumulators so fast. But if you look at the uncommon ones, you can see that the energy stored is suddenly twice as much. Also, the max input and the max output have also gone up just slightly. Rares is now 3 times as much as a normal accumulator, with a little bit more on the max input and max output. Epics, we're now talking about 4 times the amount of power stored, and then of course legendaries, we're talking 6 times the amount of power stored. So really recommend accumulators. It's something you want to look at on every single spaceship, because for one of these, I can replace 6 of these. Next thing we need to talk about is saving some power, because of course in Factorio, you're going to be spending power everywhere. And the biggest thing I noticed when looking at space age and the power requirements is a lot of the newer machines have a lot higher power requirements than anything we had previously inside Factorio. If we look at a basic chem plant here, you can see it has a max consumption of 217 kilowatts. If I look at a crusher, which you're going to be using all over space, you can see that this has 558 kilowatts worth of power demand. That is considerably more than our chem plant did originally. On top of that, we need to talk about saving some power at the same time. So as you can see, if I grab a couple of efficiency module 1s, these are going to save me 30% power for every single one of these I put inside a machine. So if I put 3 in here, you're going to see that this machine is instantly at the maximum limit, being minus 80% of normal power consumption. But of course, the modules do 30% each, but that max 80 limit means that 3 modules is what's going to be required to lower this machine to its lowest power consumption. But that is now only 42 kilowatts rather than the original 217 it was previously. If we go over to efficiency module 2s, these have an increased power saving limit, I guess, of 40% each, which means I can now max out the power savings on a single machine with just 2 modules, and also brings me down to that 42 kilowatt limit. If I look at our efficiency module 3s, that's where things get a little bit interesting, because these actually have a minus 50% consumption. So that means there's no real benefit over putting in the module 3s versus the module 2s, except at minus 100% power, it means I can put in something to consume just a little bit more power. As you can see, I've put in a single productivity module to give me just a little boost in the amount of resources I'm going to get out compared to the resources I put in. And this also is going to come with a speed negative, unfortunately, but it means that this little machine here is now running at minus 60% power. It takes in 0.94 ice, gives me 19.7 water out. Of the base one, it's going to be using a little bit less power, but also consumes a little bit more ice because this has that 4% productivity bonus, but not a lot of power cost. Of course, machines with more module slots definitely means you can take a very large advantage of this. Also, we need to talk about a couple of other things when it comes to modules. We've already covered that prod mods use a little bit of power, but also speed modules do as well. As you can see, I have a base crusher here, which has the max consumption of power of 558 kilowatts. If I fill it with 2 prod mods, well, they increase the power by 80% each, which means this is now going to use 1.4 megawatts worth of power. Finally, if I go across the speed modules, well, we're only at 1.3 megawatts worth of power because they're 70% each. But I also have beacons. Every single beacon that you put on your spaceship is going to consume 480 kilowatts worth of power, but also it's going to vastly increase the power usage of some of your machines. If we go back to our base crusher, we can see now it's costing us an extra 210% power, so it's now 1.6 megawatts for a single crusher. Sure, it does run at 2.5 times normal speed, but it's something you definitely need to take into consideration, the power costs. If we move on to the next one, the craft speed of 2.2, still awfully fast, but also 2.5 megawatts worth of power consumed. And finally, the speedy one, it's just a little bit less power, but also crafting. And on top of that, even if we're using 2.5 megawatts for a single machine, don't forget the beacon has another 0.5 megawatt on top of it for actually existing and giving that effect to all the machines around it. You can apply the same principle a little bit in reverse with this little system here. This is one of my automated re-roller machines where unfortunately I've removed all the smarts, so it looks like it's very broken currently, but it gives us a perfect example because I have a beacon here in the middle with a couple of efficiency modules dropping the power consumption by 40%, and that is applied to all the machines around it. So if I look at this particular asteroid processing machine, we can see it has energy consumption of plus 60%, and I'm subtracting from that 40% and 40%, but the beacon also has a distribution efficiency of 1.5 times. So that means rather than being 40 and 40, it's actually 60 and 60, which is negating this 60 and 60, which now means that this particular crusher is running at the same max consumption of 558 kilowatts, but also has a crafting speed of 1.6. So I've used the beacon to save power off everything, and at the same time, use modules in every single machine to speed them up. The other part of this example I wanted to show you was also making sure that you could potentially mitigate your power usage of some of the very power hungry machines depending on the overall charge of the ship. So down here I have a smart accumulator. What do I mean by a smart accumulator? I mean it needs to have a wire hooked up to it. Every single one of these machines is set to if A is greater than 50, therefore you're allowed to run. In the case of A, that's actually coming from this accumulator. So it's outputting a signal of A, which is how charged it is, and feeding that into every single one of these machines, and everything is backed up. Let me just remove that and remove that so we see some life and some action, and that might help. It definitely cleared something. Now, with the accumulator hooked up, every single one of these machines can run. If I remove the accumulator, you're going to see that everything turns back off, put it back in, and hopefully all my green lights light back up. No, of course they won't, because there's too much carbon on the belt. There we go. Less carbon, please. All right. Another thing I should mention is these machines over the side, these ones are actually making ice and also carbon for actually producing fuel, thrust, ammo. They're not actually hooked up to the same smart system, so they're going to be just carrying that wire signal through them to the other side. I put it in a loop just in case. I like to have redundancy, but this is something you can definitely do to make sure that if power is a little bit dicey, you maybe turn off some of the big power consumers just until the accumulators recharge. It's one of the things that I do on any ship that is flying out, any early game ship that's flying out to Fagola, make sure that things turn off that I don't necessarily need running all the time if the power gets a little bit low. This applies even more so when venturing out to Aquila. Next up, let's talk about some of the big power consumers you might have on your spaceship. And of course, after you visit Vulcanus, you get access to the Foundry. The Foundries are incredibly powerful, even in space, but as you can see, I have this one here, which has a max consumption of 2.5 megawatts worth of power, and it doesn't have any modules yet. And of course, one Foundry is useless because that's just going to make you molten metal. You're going to need 2 Foundries because obviously you need something to forge some plate afterwards. So you're talking 5 megawatts worth of power for a single smelter, so to speak. But if I look at adding a couple of speed modules to that, we can quickly see we're all the way up at 9.5 megawatts worth of power. And then if I go and add prod mods instead, which has the higher power consumption, we're over 10 megawatts worth of power. Now, of course, this could all get vastly worse if you start adding beacons. The base machine is now up to 7 megawatts worth of power all by itself. The speedy one is now up to almost 15 megawatts worth of power. Finally, we have, of course, the productivity one, which is well over the 15 megawatts worth of power scenario. But again, if we look at different beacons, we can see a base beacon has a distribution efficiency of 1.5 times. If I look at a legendary one, you might notice that it consumes less power, only 80 kilowatts worth of power. But it also at the same time has that increased distribution efficiency, so therefore the speed modules that are in here are more effective. Also, they're legendary ones, so they give a higher bonus. But if I now put that down here, we can see you're now at 18 megawatts worth of power. You're at 19 megawatts worth of power. Our base machine that was at 2.5 now goes all the way up to, well, 11 megawatts worth of power, just because it got put near a very powerful beacon that gave it a very large boost, but also made sure that it now consumed a whole lot more power than it did originally. Again, another great example is the EM plants. We can see we're at 2 megawatts for a base machine, 9 megawatts when we fill it full of speeds, 10 if we fill it full of prods. If I give them all access to a beacon, we're suddenly at 6 megawatts, also 13 megawatts, and also 14 megawatts. The fact that these have an extra module slot actually means that you can slam a whole lot more power into these machines to make them run a whole lot faster or a whole lot more efficient, but also a whole lot more power hungry. And if we look at a legendary beacon instead, 9 megawatts, 16 megawatts, and 17 megawatts. So your next question might be is, Jetty, if I suddenly want 10, 20 megawatts worth of power to run a single machine, where the hell am I going to get that from? And the answer is, well, you need to upgrade your power. Solar's obviously not going to cut it anymore. Maybe it's time to look at something a little bit more beefy. So down here, I have my first nuclear setup. This is something I build on my couple of ships, just those that need a little bit of extra power. And the real intention of this particular design is to make sure it can be connected directly to the hub, because of course I need to get uranium fuel cells in here. I also need to get the depleted fuel cells out of here and put back into the hub so we can drop them off at other planets. And at the same time, I want to have a smaller footprint as possible. So this little reactor here only makes 40 megawatts worth of potential heat energy. And of course, that is going to be split into 4 heat exchangers, which is then going to be turned to steam, obviously. Each one of these consuming 10.3 water per second, which means I also need to have about 41 water. I've got 40. I've got it good at 40. Also, should have definitely put a efficiency module in U to save myself a little bit of power. Still at plus 90%. It's an awful lot, but it's fine. And because I'm producing 40 megawatts worth of heat, therefore I need to have enough steam turbines to cover that. Each steam turbine actually can produce 5.8 megawatts worth of power, which means ratio-wise, I need about 7. It's actually 6.89 turbines, so I have 7 here, and I've made sure that this footprint is as small as possible, because, well, at the point I'm probably putting together my first nuclear ship, they're not probably that big. But as time continues, you're probably going to want to expand. You're probably going to want a little bit more power in the future. So we should talk about a slightly upgraded reactor. If you need more power, the easiest answer is to double it. Now, this is not just doubling it, but it's actually quadrupling it, because I have 2 reactors here that aren't producing 40 megawatts each. They actually both have a neighborhood bonus, which means they're both outputting 80 megawatts worth of power. Well, heat power. Yeah, let's go with heat. Okay, so that means I actually need to have 16 heat exchangers. Also means I need to provide 160 and change water per second, which now means I'm up to 3 chem plants, all of them consuming ice. And of course, definitely if you're going to have nuclear power, strongly suggest that you invest in a water tank, just for those times when it's not so rainy out in space. Another thing that you're going to have to very much consider when building large reactor setups is, well, you need to put in the fuel cells, but you also need to remove the depleted uranium. Now, a couple of things that I should mention very quickly when it comes to nuclear reactors is every single fuel cell that you put into the system lasts 200 seconds. And then, of course, you need to remove that fuel cell after 200 seconds. If you're running both these reactors flat out, that could be a bit of a problem. In my particular case, I've gone and added just a little bit of smarts because I'd prefer to have the option of not putting this right beside the hub. So I actually have a centrifuge right here that is designed to reprocess the nuclear fuel after it is finished inside the reactor and turn it into dull rocks. And then my plan is that after it fills up, I have an alarm on here, after it fills up with 10 dull rocks, which is actually 4 crafts of this machine, which is 20 depleted uranium fuel cells, then I actually get an alert down here in the bottom corner to say, hey, I need to come empty this machine. And if I have the space bots put some in here, we can actually get this machine running and hopefully be able to demonstrate that. Actually, we're not going to be able to demonstrate that. That's going to take forever. But with the way this system is set up, this particular centrifuge will take over an hour to actually fill up with depleted fuel cells. If you're running this reactor flat out, which I highly doubt you are, if you are, you probably should add a few more solar panels. And on top of that, both of these reactors can actually hold, and maybe I can have the space bots put some in. No, space bots are refusing. Okay, each of these reactors actually can hold 50 depleted fuel cells in them, which actually means this whole system, I'd have to come back once every 3 hours if it was running flat out and actually manually emptying it. When I say manually empty it, it means that once this finishes its craft, I can actually demonstrate by having the space bots, because there are definitely space bots up in space, empty the fuel cell, empty the dull rocks out of there. Here we go. So if I right click on those 3, they're going to end up being removed from that machine and they're instantly put over here by, like I said, the space bots. You can manually move things around on the spaceship, which is very, very handy if you want an isolated system like this. Like I said, I have 2 alerts set up. One to go off if I have too many dull rocks in this machine. Another one to go off if I have too many used up fuel cells inside the reactor. Last thing I should mention, something that you find when you go to Aquilo, is storing excess heat. As you might notice, I have some smarts on these reactors to make sure that they don't have too much fuel in there. We're not just burning fuel for the sake of fuel. We wait till the reactors cool off a little bit and then we add more fuel in. At the same time, I should also mention that yes, if you want to store heat, one of the things Aquilo taught us very well is we could store heat inside a tank. I could get a tank over here and store a bunch of steam. My other option is the heat pipes themselves. If we look at this particular reactor, we can see it's 706 degrees currently. And if I add heat pipe through there, we're going to see it very quickly drops in temperature. Both of these reactors have a little bit of extra room to put in a little bit of extra heat pipe. If you want to have a little bit more heat storage, we're down to 590 degrees. Can I add a bit more? Because eventually you're going to trigger. Oh, there we go. It triggered. It's thrown some fuel in. Can I get your friend to trigger as well? Oh, he triggered as well. There we go. Both of them now have that 80 megawatt neighborhood bonus, and we can store a whole lot of heat inside these heat pipes. Every single heat pipe actually stores about the same heat energy as 5.8k steam. So again, if we grabbed a tank and we threw down a tank here, a tank holds 25,000 steam in total, whereas that's 5, 10, 15, that's 30, that's 45, and a whole lot of change. It's almost 50,000 steam inside this exact same footprint with just 9 little heat pipes. That also heat pipes I can rearrange in and around buildings, throw an extra one over here, an extra one around here, even drag it out the front if I have extra room over here, which I'm not using, and store heat in a whole bunch of heat pipes, whereas a tank is a pretty solid square little building. But if you need even more power, once you've gone out and you've visited Aquilo, you've made the best of your speed modules, your efficiency beacons, your nuclear reactors, your solar panels, and your accumulators, you will finally unlock the ability to start making fusion power. Fusion power comes with a couple of distinct advantages. The first big advantage is the type of fuel cells you need to put in. You just throw in a fuel cell and then the reactor takes care of the rest. So the fuel cell goes in here and it's only burnt and consumed if you're actually consuming the power. This is technically running. It's technically running not terribly well because I don't need a whole lot of power, obviously, on this particular ship, but it is actually running. It does come with, like I said, a couple of catches. One of them is you need to have the fusion generators directly connected to the fusion reactor. You also need to have a whole lot of fluoroketone that you need to, well, constantly cool down. So you can see that I have a cryogenics plant right here that also consumes 1.5 megawatts worth of power because I didn't bother putting any efficiency modules in it. Cool, I got none of those on the ship. Can we put in a couple of those instead? Cool. That brings it down to 300 kilowatts. Much, much better. The other catch is the actual main reactor itself, when running flat out, also consumes 10 megawatts worth of power. So this little reactor setup here that makes 100 megawatts also consumes 10 megawatts. plus another 300 kilowatts, or a megawatt if you forget to put in efficiency modules, but it is much more space efficient. This takes up the same amount of space as, well, my original nuclear reactor, with plenty left over. Also, you might notice it doesn't require any water input. It is a closed loop. But then again, when you start getting into space, when you get deeper into space, the power is something you're going to always want more of. So then again, we just take it and we double it. Except same with the nuclear reactors. These guys also have a enabled bonus. So this is actually 200 megawatts plus another 200 megawatts. This is a 400 megawatt reactor. And if I pick up the whole thing, we can see that, well, it's a little bit bigger than my 40 megawatt reactor, but it's also considerably smaller than the 160 megawatt nuclear reactor that we had previously. And again, I've maximized these I've maximized every single tile as best as I can to make sure I can get the best out of this particular system. Also, I should mention, if you're interested in any of these modules that I'm showing as part of this video, they are all available to my patrons. It's something I like to do to give back to those that are choosing to support this channel and choose to support what I do here. If we keep going and you want even more power, well, the good news is we're now up to 900 megawatts because you have 300%, 300%, 300% bonus. And don't forget, we haven't used a single lick of water to make 900 megawatts worth of power. If we were to do something like this with a nuclear reactor, it means I'd be needing 9 ice per second, which is going to be pretty fine out in the far reaches of the solar system, where it's pretty abundant with ice. But then again, I also need to crush that ice, I need to process that ice, and it does mean parking above a planet could be awfully dangerous. And again, size-wise, at 900 megawatts, we've almost reached the same size as our original nuclear reactor. But of course, there's always more power out there. So if you're at all desperate for a little bit more power, that's 1.9 gigawatts, or a slightly more square design. I prefer the square designs. I find it's easier to take square modules and snap them together to make the best out of my ship. But yeah, that's an awful lot of power for a fairly small footprint. But that brings us to the end of this little video. That brings us into power up here in space. We do have more things to add as part of this series. We've still got to go through, well, logistics, but also at the same time, we really should cover how to get quality asteroids and what the whole quality asteroids really means, especially when we've covered a couple of quality items inside this video. But with all that said, I think this is where I want to leave it. But before I do that, I just want to ask. That like, I asked whether I could borrow. Is there any chance I could keep it? Also, if you're interested in learning more on spaceship designs, I will remind you down in the description and in the first pinned comment below, you will find the playlist with everything from weapons to storage to engines to so on and so forth. But with all that said and done, I'm going to leave this video here. As always, thank you guys so much for watching. Do hope you've enjoyed, and I'll see you in the very next video. All right, bye.